Good morning and welcome to Seattle Atheist Church. Atheist, agnostic, skeptic, whatever you like to call yourself, you are welcome here. At Seattle Atheist Church, we call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear anything supernatural promoted from the podium. Our church was founded on the principles of scientific naturalism and secular ethics. Truth claims are attempted here, and we stand ready to revise our thinking in light of new information. We attempt to be excellent to all conscious beings, and we believe in good, because good works in non-mysterious ways. If that sounds right to you, you are probably in the right place. So I have a couple of announcements. Today after church, if you are interested, some people are attending Veg Fest. So just mention you'd like to go, and there are people who are going. And then next week's talk is on the Houston Manifesto. We meet every Sunday at noon in this building. So the way we do it is the members ourselves give the talk, everyone is invited to the planning meetings, and then afterwards we'll get into a discussion circle and we'll have a discussion. So the theme for today's talk is, are we morally culpable for our false beliefs?
Yes.
Come on.
Hello, my name is Jonathan. Good to see everyone here. And so the answer to start, it depends on more information on just it may depend on more information than just that false belief, and we'll get into that. In Renee Van Wagner, her article, she posits that very same condition can excuse the very same condition that can excuse agents for not doing things what they ought do or what they ought not do. That can also excuse them for having these false beliefs. On that same line of thinking, and assuming that person is believing their thoughts are true, and that they can pass that some other basic checks that these individuals too see themselves as responsible. They can be responsible, and we'll get into that. So first, what conditions does he claim work for this for this kind of check, for this claim? Well, the article is called "Ignorance and Force: 2 Excusing Conditions for False Beliefs," and so that clarifies pretty clearly that the 2 clarifying excusing conditions are ignorance and force, and he clarifies even clearer that it's a specific type of ignorance, and that's called non-culpable ignorance. And what does that mean? And what does that mean by we'll clear up something. We'll clear up some more vocabulary in a minute, but we'll start by going over some more information here. So now these checks. First, the freedom check, and like how he said how force was in his article, the opposite of freedom is force. If you do not act freely, it's very difficult to act. If you do not act free, it's very difficult to act in a way that you can be praised or blamed. And if you can be praised or blamed, that is called being culpable. if you cannot be culpable, if you're acting in a way that's not culpable, then you are not. If you're not culpable, then you are not blameworthy. So that's what we mean by not culpable. That you cannot be thought of in these sorts of ways. So that's the first thing that we're going to be looking at is freedom. So are you free the way that you're acting?
And you can give an example of that, of the non-culpability, non-culpable ignorance?
Sure, we can do that. Sure. So I'll do the two checks, and then we'll go over examples. But some more information about that. This type of there are plenty of questions up for debate about what is and how much freedom should be given to specific actions. And not every action is necessarily in all a zero-sum event. Some examples, for example, might be an employer telling an employee to do something illegal, or someone doing something, or someone under an influence of drugs. Now, are they free or are they not free? I'm not answering those questions at this time, but I'm saying that these are, while you do have free will, you you have less freedom than you would otherwise. So that's the first one. The second one is we're checking the mental state. And that is, how much control does the moral agent, and the moral agent is a person who can make a decision, how much control do they have in their action? And what this question tells us is how aware are they? And that's all we're asking for is this person aware? And so together, we put these two things together. We find out, is this person freely, aware, making a decision? And if so, that this is a way that they're making a decision that we can judge them upon. And if they're controlled, and if they are not aware of what they're doing, we typically do not judge them as harshly on these on these decisions. And that's what we're going on at this part. So now that non-culpable ignorance. So what is it? So an example of non-culpable ignorance would be, say, if you opened a door and there was an animal hiding behind it, and you hit it with a door. Now you obviously didn't mean to hit it, but you did. But you would not be as blamed as much for this act if you had done this intentionally. And that's what we mean by this is what this non-culpableness is doing for us in this situation here, and why it's harder to judge people for these sorts of actions. Is that if we didn't know what we were doing, and what I'm not doing is I'm not raising the argument about what people know they are doing and what they are not doing. That's not something I'm raising in this article, but I'm just saying that it's possible for it to happen. And so that's the first point, is that so now we have this example of this animal hiding behind a door. And then we hit it, and we were upset, we're upset about it, I don't know. But we hit it, and we hit it because we were ignorant. And this ignorant, and what does it mean to be ignorant in this sense? And this ignorant simply means to be not knowing. It doesn't mean really much more than that, but really that's it. It's just that we just didn't know, and that's it. And this also clears up something, that there is a difference between ignorance, but not all not knowing is ignorance. And what does that mean? That not all knowing is ignorance. S has a true belief that someone has a true belief that P has his belief has no warranted. So someone believes something correctly, but without any correct information. Now this is not correct, but it's not ignorant. And why is this important? Because it means that you can be judged on it, because it's not ignorant. If something is ignorant, isn't simply just not knowing information. Isn't simply not knowing information. And that's a major difference between knowledge from not having knowledge and being ignorant about a topic. So if you don't know something, if someone tells you something about there could be here are two different examples. Say, for example, someone tells you a stork delivers babies, and someone tells you 2 + 2 = 5. Now, you can be, if you disbelieve that the stork if you don't believe the person when they tell you that the stork delivers the babies, you aren't being ignorant. You are just not believing a fact, an incorrect fact is not ignorant. But if you don't believe 2 + 2 = 5, that is not, if you're considering it, and then you say, hey, you can't, that's a proposition that you can reject simply by thinking about it. And you need to have some information in order to get to ignorance. You can't get to ignorance simply by. You need information in order to get to ignorance. For example, you need to say, if you thinking about if you're thinking about if someone tells you Vienna is the capital of Germany, you need to know that Germany exists in order to be ignorant that that is incorrect. If you don't know that, then you can't be ignorant of it, and you can't be judged on this. You just are hearing a false information. An alternate way we can ask the question is we can go back to awareness, and we can look at the content and the kind. And when we look at awareness, we're looking at the content, the kind, and the question if awareness is even required. But we'll get back to that third question. But the answers to these questions have four plausible requirements involved. They're the awareness of action, moral significance, information of consequence, and of alternative. And we'll take them one at a time, and we'll answer them through a little story here. So first, the requirement of awareness of action. So we're going to talk about to be responsible for his action. Someone named John must know what he is doing. And what's John doing? So we're going to say John is presses a button and he thinks he's turning on a light. But to turn the button on is actually turning on a treadmill. And someone is standing on the treadmill and he hurts that person that's on the treadmill. And we'll say that person's name is Mary. So if John falsely believes that the button is a light switch and that he isn't aware that by pressing it, he will start the treadmill, and he cannot be blamed, it seems that he cannot be blamed for Mary's injuries. Similarly, if John correctly believes that pressing the button will start the treadmill, but isn't aware that Mary is standing on the treadmill, it seems that he isn't blameworthy either. These seems can be refined, since John's ignorance of the button's functions or Mary's locations can itself be blameworthy. In which many people think, and that's what many people think of a situation like this. The lesson then is that for an agent to be directly blameworthy for an action that is blameworthy in a way that doesn't derive from previous instances of blameworthiness, such as culpability for the ignorance from which from the action, he must be aware that he is performing the action in question. Now, this isn't completely agreed with, but that's the thought there, that he must be aware. Again, I'm just going to repeat that line again. That he must be aware that the person must be aware that he is performing the action in question and be aware of it and in an appropriate description. In this case, John must be aware that by pressing the button, he's activating the treadmill with Mary on it, or alternatively, that by pressing the button and activating the treadmill, he is causing Mary to fall to the ground. Now again, this is just the first requirement. on responsibility, and many deny that this type of awareness of an action is directly even responsible. The second type of awareness is that of moral significance. For John to be blameworthy, he has to be aware of the action's moral significance, or say moral balance. In other words, he must have a belief about the actions being wrong, or alternatively, a belief about the presence of what features make the action wrong. So we'll just say it's wrong making features. This kind of belief amounts to an awareness of moral significance because it involves the action's wrongness, the way that he conceives it particularly. The second kind of belief amounts to awareness of moral significance because it involved awareness to those features in the actions that are in fact significant, regardless to whether the agent is also the moral significant is also moral significance, and it is also aware of the moral significance that they actually have. So when John presses the button, enters a belief that what he is doing is morally wrong, he has awareness of the action's moral significance. If alternatively, he believes that his action is morally wrong, but not wrong with, say, all things considered, he lacks that awareness. So if he does not understand that by pushing that button, that would even harm somebody, he would not be blameworthy. If, on the other hand, John lacks the belief about overall wrongness, but on the other beliefs about the action's wrong-making features, for example, that it can harm her. If he has the awareness that the action's moral significance, if he has no moral significant, sees no moral significant reason that it will harm her, again, he will not be held blameworthy. This position, according to what the relevant awareness is, entails that the moral knowledge, or at least the beliefs, is necessary for responsibility. Whereas a position, according to which relevant awareness denies necessity of moral knowledge. The third here, we're getting through these here. The third requirement is the awareness of the consequences. In a natural description of the case, we would say that John is responsible for Mary's breaking an arm. that is, he is blameworthy for the latter event. We'll just call this a consequence of John's actions. What kind of awareness is required for John to be blameworthy for it? The straightforward answer is that he must have a belief about the event occurring as a result of his action. However, there's disagreement about what the content of this belief must be. Some think it must be very specific. In this sense, the agent has to believe that an event of exactly the kind occurred could result from the action, where others think that a belief with a more general content is fine. According to the first position, for John to be blameworthy for the consequence of his action, he must have entertained the belief that Mary would or might break her arm as a result of the fall, whereas according to the latter position, a belief that someone would or might be harmed is enough. Fourth, and finally, the requirement of awareness of alternatives. Some philosophers argue that an agent can't be blameworthy for a wrong action unless he believes that there is at least one alternative and permissible courses of actions open to him. For instance, Levy writes, perhaps it need be the case that an agent needs genuine access to alternate possibilities when they choose an act, but they do not need epistemic access to a range of alternatives. By epistemic, this just means thought-based alternatives. They can only appropriately be blamed for performing an action if they believed the alternatives were available to them and understood the significance of these alternatives. So if we're applying this idea to the example, John would be blameworthy only if he believed that he could have pursued an alternative and permissible course of action, such as refraining from pressing the button. But not everyone agrees with this, that this is a genuine requirement on responsibility. Others argue that an agent can be blameworthy even if he believes or even knows that he couldn't have done otherwise, as long as this belief doesn't interfere with their own deliberation about whether to perform this wrong action. So in sum, there are 4 different things, awareness of which seems at least initially relevant for responsibility. Awareness of one's actions under appropriate description, its moral significance, potential consequences, and alternatives to that action. So this is the second way to see if an action view is can be judged. I want to take a second here to talk about 2 words here. These words are these are 2 logical words. It's called de dicto and de re. And what they mean is one means of some and one means of one. And I'm going to give here's an example of a de dicto idea. Sometimes when you hear them in content, they don't seem very odd, but they can have different words. They can have different meanings. So if someone says I value, or I like to marry the tallest person. I like the tallest person in Seattle. Now, one interpretation of that sentence is, well, am I talking about the de dicto of some means I could be talking about all of the people, so I could be talking about one particular person. I couldn't be talking about one person in particular, so I could just be talking about someone. And then the other way of saying that would be to talk about, I had someone in mind, and I'm talking about, and they just happen to be the tallest person. And so there are two. So it's the same sentence, but it kind of has two different ways to look at it. And I'm just going to wrap up one short bit, and we'll be done here. What I want to talk about is another. If people are blameworthy, and I want to talk about it through Huck Finn. And we all know Huck Finn, right? And I'm just going to skip it. This is a question about if Huck can be praised or blamed by for helping Jim escape, and by thinking about the way that he acted in that with those two words, that was that de re and that de dicto. It can look two different ways, and it's kind of a debate in philosophy, and about which one is correct. So Huck Finn, who helps Jim escape, he helps him despite believing that he is stealing Jim away from Jim's owner. Huck does the right thing, according to many, that he does it, and he does it for the right and he does it for the right reasons, namely in response to his humanity. However, Huck is unaware that helping Jim, he doesn't help Jim because he is an abolitionist or anything like that. He is he's just helping him. Huck, he's unaware that he is helping Jim because he is a person like himself. He is aware that he is that he's helping him run away, but he is not capable of bringing to consciousness his non-conscious awareness of Jim's humanity. And the question is Huck praiseworthy for helping Jim run away? And again, this falls into that de re. And if we look into it, that de re awareness, and that was oh my gosh, which one was de re? De re was of some of the awareness of from that perspective, the awareness, the right making feet. De re is of one, because if you're looking at just him helping this one person, he's doing a good thing. But if he is not, doing something for one, if he is just helping somebody steal something, then he is doing a bad thing. So since Huck seems to be praiseworthy despite lacking moral awareness, this goes back to the question: is awareness praise? This is awareness even is awareness required for something to be praiseworthy? And that would go back to the same parallel that would hold for blameworthiness as well as praiseworthiness. But not everyone agrees with that. Some people think that while that it's can be an intuition that Huck is praiseworthy, it can be argued that you can only be praiseworthy if you do something intentionally, if you intentionally do the right thing. And this is not something that Huck Finn does. He's not intentionally helping Huck do the right thing, even if he is. And this is an argument that is still going on about which should Huck be praiseworthy or blameworthy, and can he be held to that standard for in this situation? Because this incorporates and this would argue that Huck is by going over it this way, it could even be argued that Huck is actually blameworthy, given that he actually had the belief that his action is overall morally wrong for doing something like that, if it's strictly going on intention for doing the wrong thing. So lots of this is still up in the air about what is normal, what is right, what is wrong. Many people are still dealing with it and trying to find out a pattern of beliefs that works for all situations. And that is still something that philosophers are looking at. And I'm just going to leave it at that.